The GovX Show is supported by Forrester, helping government organisations perform at their best. Visit forrester.com to learn more.
Hey again, welcome to another episode of the GovX Show, the podcast for public sector changemakers. Joining me today is Jim Stamp, who's Principal Technologist from our friends MadeTech. And I set him a challenge before joining him for the conversation, which was to underline some of the key principles and foundations of effective data-driven services and effective data-driven organizations. Everybody's talking about data, but how are we using it effectively in the public sector? Jim racked his brains and came up with a list of those key principles that we should all be aware of if we want to make the best of data in our own organizations. So lots to jump into. We'll dive right in now. So Jim, welcome to the GovX Show. Fantastic to have you joining us today.
There.
So we're going to have a little look at some of the foundations of data-driven organizations in the public sector. What do they typically do well? What do they typically have in common? What do they get right? What are those pieces that if you focus on, it provides that good foundation? It's not a caveat, it's not going to do everything for us, but it's a good starting point, and we'll perhaps get into some of the kind of more specific context. But so really looking forward to jumping into that. And you as principal technologist at MadeTech, presumably working with lots of public sector organizations, so be really interested in hearing more about that and your experience. So let's kick things off, set the scene a bit. Tell us about you and your role in MadeTech and how you're working with public sector organizations in particular right now.
So I guess at MadeTech, we only work with public sector. So that's always a bonus when you're trying to work out how public sector work. But I'm, as you said, principal technologist, largely focused on data. I joined a year ago. I think I've worked on one non-data project since I started. So I'm now working sort of with an overview across 4 data projects at the moment. But I'm also looking after the internal data capability. So trying to build that up, trying to recruit the right people, put the training in place to take our digital engineers and make them a bit more data focused if they want to become data focused, and then working out the best practice. So looking at things like reference implementations. So all of our engineers, when they land on a new project, have a guiding principle of the sort of thing that we've done in the past and the kind of things that have worked well, both from a technology, ways of working, and then recommendations of how customers might want to adopt those systems.
Yeah, and is there a kind of common type of project that MadeTech are getting involved with right now, or are they pretty varied, or is the public sector as a whole kind of got a particular area of focus they're looking with help in terms of cracking those challenges, or are they pretty varied right now?
So I think they're largely centered around 1 or 2 types of capability, but the level of maturity is different across the different organizations. So I guess of those 2, one would be a sort of a data platform. You're talking a data lake or a lake house, or at some point, maybe one of them might be able to adopt a data mesh, but we're not quite there with any of our customers yet. But the other one would then be sort of more of a BI or analytics platform. So they've got the data, it's in a location that they can do stuff with. They just need to be able to assess it and visualize it and distribute it.
Okay, gotcha. So I thought I'd set you some homework because I'm like that, and your colleague Glenn Oxcourt came on a few months ago, and I made him do some work as well. And I promise you, it's not me being vindictive towards MadeTech, but it's the fact that you guys obviously work with so many different public sector organizations. That's always really interesting to find out, what are you picking up, what are the signals you're getting, what are the common challenges that you're hearing, and really start to distill those so for our audience they can understand, it's not just us, these are the challenges that everyone else is going through as well. And I think that sharing information and everybody understanding that it's not just you, that the public sector as a whole has some common challenges. I always think it's a good way to go to sort of bring them to the surface. So we asked you to have a think about what we're going to call the foundations of data-driven organizations. So what within a typical organization, notwithstanding they all have their quirks and different systems and legacy and all that kind of stuff, what are those things that you see done well, or what are those things you see that you need to help them with, quite commonly to help them improve their capability in terms of digital and data. So we set you that challenge, and
I guess my answers are specifically, I mean, it's an interesting challenge, but my answers are probably more from a technology point of view.
Yep.
I guess because I'm a software engineer by background, so when someone asks what the foundations would be, my head automatically goes to tech. So there will definitely be some things that we can discuss that are slightly less tech as well, but I don't actually remember what I wrote down. So this is going to be an interesting journey.
Okay, so maybe I'll tell you what you said, and then you can try and recall. We've already mentioned you've got a young baby in the house, so every night that goes by, a little bit more of the memory fades. So I'll be kind. I'll help you. It's nearly Christmas as we record this. This is probably going to come out in the new year, but okay, you've played in my heartstring. I'm going to help you out here, Jim. So the first one was a focus on user value. So tell me a bit about that. Tell me why that matters right now.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the data platforms that I've experienced in the past, and this is largely from landing in a customer's sort of real estate and them saying, well, we built this data thing a couple of years ago. It didn't really work. And then they say, can you come in and build us another one? And it's slightly astonishing that the amount of money that people can spend on building something without applying the same techniques that they do when they build something that's sort of a digital system. So if you're building a website these days, you're not going to build it and expect people to use it. You do testing. You work out what the user value is. You work out that you're delivering to those requirements of what the user wants, not what you think the user wants. And so data platforms that have failed in the past largely follow that build it and they will come mentality. They don't really think about the users because the users are internal people. And you often find that the people who are running the data platform projects see themselves as the archetypal user of the platform, because it's usually someone that is either a data engineer or a data analyst or a data scientist that is running the project.
Okay, so the danger is, so what would I like this to do?
Exactly.
What would I like? Thanks very much. And they're having this kind of like back and forth in their own head with their internal monologues, as opposed to getting out there.
Yeah, so, focusing on what the users actually want. And for me, it goes a step further than what they want. It's more, what problems do they currently have? To make a data platform sticky, you need to focus on the problem, or a problem that you can fix for that user. Because if you can fix a problem, you're making their life easier, and you're making it so that they can then, that they have a reason to use it at that point.
Yeah, interesting. And it's I guess significant that there are clearly areas that you've mentioned where that battle's been won. The user-centric thinking prevails everywhere. Websites are a good example. Sort of citizen-facing portals for public services. That UX piece, that CX piece is just ingrained in everybody. But there are still these pockets where just culturally that just still hasn't quite taken hold, and there's still this kind of legacy of, well, we'll do what we want and then it'll work kind of thing, which is got to catch up, I guess, is the challenge.
And it's interesting that a lot of internal systems still suffer from that as well. And even if you're building an internal website, you still need to build it for the users of that website, even if they're your colleagues. And so I guess to a degree, they suffer from it, but data seems to be another step behind them even further, mainly because the tools are so complicated and it's really hard to find that way of simplifying them for people so that they can understand it. It's tough.
Okay, so we've got a really good principle there that should play through that whole sort of digital data piece. And next one, I guess this is about getting started and getting moving, is about balance research with delivery. So tell us for you what that balance should look like and why it matters.
So I guess this is applicable to both the creation of a data platform, but also the use of a data platform. So there's the classic science versus engineering, research versus sort of engineering type sort of dichotomy, I guess, but not quite. But it is, from an engineer's point of view, having that time to look at different ways of doing things. The data space is moving so fast, and people say that building websites, you get framework fatigue building websites. Data's even faster, in my opinion. The number of new things that are coming out, you can literally spend all day reading blogs, reading Medium posts, you can just trying to keep up. And so I think it's worth remembering that what you're building now will only last so long. And so you have to balance that new thing versus old thing. But you don't want to just keep putting new things in. You just running on that treadmill trying to keep up doesn't work either. So research long enough that for as long as you need to deliver those user value. If it's not quite there, there's probably something else out there that you can use. Everyone is writing data tools at the moment, and there's such a variety out there. And then I guess the other side of it is the research versus delivery when it comes to actual data. And I think it's very easy for organizations to set a challenge for an analyst or a scientist to go and deliver some functionality. And actually, my experience in the past is if you give those scientists and those analysts X percentage of their day to do a bit of research, or of their week or of their month, to go away and just do some thinking, just play with the data, find something interesting. Often it's useless, but sometimes they come up with a nugget. You just go, okay, we can use that. That definitely answers something we hadn't considered. And there's such a depth to the data that we're collecting now. There's often some little strange and wonderful correlations between two things that you haven't connected in the past that just give you that insight that means that you can improve that service, or you can deliver that functionality to your users or residents.
And that space for innovation, I mean, you could apply that to any industry, right? The daily grind and focus on specific outcomes, predefined outcomes versus, okay, well, let's look at the very end user experience and work back from that and see where it takes us on the way. It's critical, isn't it? It's difficult to do sometimes because we get caught up in the rigmarole of.
I think the interesting thing for me is, having come from industry, industry are comfortable with investing that time to find those things. As you said, it's R&D is not a new thing.
True.
But for me, for the public sector, it doesn't seem to be a thing that is accepted.
Is that a well, we can't just be noodling about trying things because we're on the public dime here, so we better have some clear outcomes and activities in mind. Is a bit of that thing?
And that's why I put it in there. That is why I put it in there, because the focus on delivery, there's almost that guilt, right? There's that slightly uncomfortable. We're doing something that doesn't deliver something, and people do just want to just deliver, and that's a good thing. This is public money that you're spending, but equally, that balance is so important, because there are things that will just advance the systems so quickly. It needs to have a good balance in there, and I think people feeling comfortable with just spending half a day every now and again just playing with the numbers and seeing what they find, or having a pet project, right? Something that they do long term that they don't tell anyone about until they're happy. And it's nice when people do that. And you'll often find service managers just go, actually, that's really cool, thank you, I like that. And that's really going to help our residents or our users. It's good.
So big message there for people to preserve that time, find that time, do some of that good stuff. Right, the next one, you're going to have to help me out, because it's the longest one. It's probably got the longest words in it. So talk me through. So use domain-driven development to create context and identify boundaries and relationships between them. So unpack that for me. The cogs are really grinding in my head, but tell me what you mean by that.
So there's a way of building an understanding of your organization and then delivering systems, digital systems, using that understanding. And it's called domain-driven development. It's been around for a while. It's not a new concept, but it allows you to analyze. If you can almost visualize your organization as a set of domains. So this area looks after our users. This area, if you think about local government, for example, this area looks after council tax or revenue, either business rates or tax. This area looks after housing repairs, this area. And so you can start building those separations between them. And it often follows an organizational structure, not always, but you can start building a vocabulary that describes the different domain objects. So a user, collections, repairs. A resident, because a user might be different to a person, might be different to a resident, right? You can definitely have a user in a local sort of local government sense that isn't yet a resident that's signing up on your website, right? So they're definitely a user. They might not be resident yet, but creating that separation between those those entities is important. And the reason that it makes such a difference is that if you haven't split that off and created what is called a ubiquitous language, great word, then it makes it very difficult to have an equal conversation, because different people will call a user a different thing to another part of the organization. Yeah. And so writing down what a user is versus what a person is versus what a resident is so important, and having that declared. And then I guess from a digital point of view, that then allows you to design your systems using that vocabulary, using that ubiquitous language, and isolating the boundaries around those domains. And that makes it clear what things are. And then the data platform, the data domain, that plane that sits underneath that operational plane, should follow that same language. And that makes it easy for analysts and easy for scientists and engineers to go in there and just know what something means. They don't have to go, oh, this is the user set from that department, therefore it's this type of user. Or it's the user set from that department, therefore it's not a resident, it's an actual user of the website. And so, you know, it's so important to reduce that cognitive load on people. So the classic book is Don't Make Me Think, right? You should be able to go to a website and know where things are without having to think. It should be intuitive. And that's equally as important when it comes to data products.
Yeah, as somebody that has tried and failed to order a green garden waste bin from their local council, and to be fair, my wife said it goes well. She can't find how you do it either. So there's clearly room for improvement. I'd love to be a user, but I'm just a slightly miffed resident at the moment. So yeah, I can from the sort of Luddites end of the process, I can confirm that finding out who they are and how you want to help them is kind of key. And the next one I like, because this is Jim Stamp, principal technologist, says, don't get hung up on technology. It's all about culture. I love that one. I think we know there's a lot of truth in that. So tell me what that means to you and why that matters.
So I guess this plays back to the build it and they will come point that we mentioned earlier. I think the reason that data platforms fail isn't due to the tech. The tech is easy. I've had a quote from, well, I won't say what cloud provider it is, but I've had a quote from a cloud provider: we can create a data platform in a day. All it takes is a day to do it. And actually, within a week, you can have a functioning platform. We've done that. We've done that for one of our customers. The problem isn't the technology. The problem is the people who use it. It's the training. It's the ownership. Ownership is so hard to get right. If you expect your analysts to own the data, things will fail. It is the service areas that own that data. From a legal point of view, from a GDPR point of view, they own that data. And so just because it's being copied into the data platform doesn't mean you stop owning it, doesn't mean you should stop taking pride in it and allow the analysts to rip it to pieces and do what they want with it. It's that cultural aspect, that making sure that you train all of your people to be data literate. And data literacy can take different guises, but you're never going to become a data mature organization if you haven't been through that cultural shift.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I guess on a similar thing about this sort of long-term view, that the next one I like, and I guess, the L word of legacy that sends shivers through the spines of, chief technology officers in government, is architect your tech to be replaced. So tell us, I think I see where you're going with that, but what does that mean in reality and how do you do it?
I mean, it's really hard to do in digital as well as in data, but there are mechanisms that you can use to just, I guess there are foundational pieces that you should put in place that won't change, but equally try and use open things as much as you can. Now, there is a cost with open source frameworks. They're free to use, but they can be expensive to maintain. And so avoiding them. I've seen many of our customers say, actually, we don't want to use open source because we can't afford the engineers to keep it updated. And yet, if you're using something that is vendor specific, you're locked into that technology. And so when you select that technology, make sure that you have an exit strategy from that technology, basically.
Yeah.
When you buy it or when you install it in your system, make sure you have a way of getting your data out, getting it out in a performant way, getting it out in a format that you can then reuse. Or if you're writing scripts, make sure that you can take those scripts and shift them from one system to another without having to rewrite everything. Because at some point you will make that decision to just go, this isn't working for us anymore. And there's a nice shiny thing over there that we can use, which will fix that problem. And if you can't get your data or your business knowledge out of that system, then you're stuck and you're locked in. Yeah. So thinking about that lock-in and that escape strategy is so important.
So it's not planning your divorce on your wedding day, but it is maybe like having a conversation about where you want to go in life in 10 years time and
I suppose it is. It's the equivalent of a prenup, right? It's not far off a prenup.
Yeah.
But I guess it is slightly different to sort of relationships.
Yeah. Maybe less screaming, maybe more. Who knows? But
I think it is important. You do need to think about how you're going to get off this, and I think that's true of all technology. Should be true of all technology. We've had customers that literally cannot access their data. They can't access their data. They've bought a system, they've been using it for years, they've started building a data platform, and all of a sudden they can't get the data out of the system because it's completely proprietary. And that to me, that's the opposite of everything that MadeTech, for one, is all about, but also me. It just makes me shudder and shiver. It's just a horrible place to be. You own that data, it's your data. Yeah. You have the right to have it. And it shouldn't ever be locked in.
Yeah, absolutely. Long-term thinking. Okay, the next one. This is an interesting one. So don't centralize your governance. Centralize the objectives of governance. So let's understand that distinction.
Yeah, I guess this is true of everything. You can remove the word governance and insert many different terms in there. And I chose governance because it covers a lot of things. And I think the days of having a governance committee that looks at the data and chooses whether the data has the right quality, that the personal data or the personally identifiable data should be this and shouldn't be that, and reviewing data sets and reviewing processes of cleaning that data set. And it feels counter to what we've done within the digital domain. So the digital domain has gone from that monolithic to that microservice sort of architecture, and data should be doing the same thing. And I think governance is the easiest thing to do to start separating that out. So rather than saying this data set should have all of this information in it, the ID column should always be that this column should always be within these bounds. No, you should be saying how you should be providing data to your users. It's that decentralization. So the team that generate the data own the quality of that data. They own the standardization of that data. How you should standardize it and how you should assure quality should be set by a central point or agreed as a federated governance platform of some description. And it should be up to each team to be honest and to own their own data and their own governance for their data, rather than having it imposed on them. And that's true of quality, of access, of standardization of terms and data types, of so many different things. But it's governance is a useful one to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the sexiest term, but it often is the win or lose factor in so many projects and successes. What are the rules of engagement? Who understands what their responsibilities are? you don't want the Wild West, but you don't want some draconian centralized, edict either. And somewhere in between that sort of empowered, like you say, federalized model is probably the way to go. So that's a good one.
Really
so
hard
next
to
one,
get right though.
Yeah,
really hard to get right.
Easy to say, hard to get right, as with so many of these things. So one to think on. And the next one I like as well. Build your data like you do APIs or other products. So what's that mindset or methodology that you're alluding to there, and how can organizations be better at that?
So I guess this is the next step on from that decentralized governance, and you would never build an API for consumption either internally or externally, especially not externally, and then just randomly change numbers, right? You wouldn't remove a field from your API or just fundamentally change it. You put version numbers in there, or you'd provide them with an upgrade path of some description, or you'd have another version, and you would allow your users to upgrade gracefully from version 1 to version 2, or there's lots of ways that you can manage it. Often we find data is collected and stored from points within the system that aren't really designed. So the point that you tap into when you're collecting data to put into a data platform, or that you tap into to then summarize or join with some other data, often aren't designed to be used in the same way. And the cost of that, the classic one is, we'll just take a copy of your database tables overnight. And the database is owned by the service team. It's not designed to be consumed externally. There's a reason that you always put an API on top of a database, is because the API is designed to be used, whereas the database is designed to be at the whim of a developer, or even worse, at the code that generates the database. And that can change every day. Every time someone commits some code, it can change the database structure. And that's not great, but it can happen. And so if you're taking a copy of that data every day, you've got to cope with that in a data platform. And I guess the pain that historically data engineers and data analysts have felt as that data changes, regularly, you're having to redo everything all the time, and it saps energy. So for me, the starting point is collect the data from a place where it has been designed. So get the API to emit an event every time someone writes to the API. Beautiful, because you can use the same data that's being written to the API to emit the event for us to capture. The next step is make the team that generates the data own the data in the data platform, because if they change something, they then have tests failing in the data platform. So it's that shared ownership, and it goes back to that governance as well. It's that decentralizing and federating that ownership of data products. View your data as a product. It's not just a piece of data. It's a thing that you need to maintain and care about and love, because otherwise people won't use it, and it will cost the organization time and money and effort. And ultimately, data platforms will fail if people just, like you said, if it turns into the Wild West, then people don't use it. You lose trust.
Yeah. Love your data. I can see the t-shirt range as we speak. And the last one, and you mentioned the trust word there, and I guess this maybe starts to speak towards that interesting interaction and tipping point between public sector and government organizations, and the understanding around what's data for and who has what and why. And so the last one you put here is, you're unlikely, very unlikely, in fact, to need personal data, so pseudonymize it. Tell us a bit about that, because there's this ethical transparency piece that plays through as well, and then I guess there's also sort of technical piece as well. So for you, what's the key thrust at that point?
So I guess coming from a non-public sector, it's GDPR was an absolute nightmare. And I'm always shocked and pleasantly surprised when I land on a customer on this side and they go, actually, we don't have to worry about GDPR because we've got legitimate use and statutory reasons to collect this data. Yeah. And it's like, brilliant. Okay, so that's rule number one. We don't have to worry. We don't have to worry. Of course, we have to worry, but the limitations are nowhere near as severe as they are in the non-public sector. There's a good reason that you can't tell the council to remove your council tax records. You know, good, but you can't.
Try his mind. Yeah.
So I think with that baseline, it's very easy for people to say, well, why shouldn't we collect this information about this user? And the temptation to do it is so strong because it feels like you can do a lot more with it if you know the name of the person. And yet, actually, there is very little that you can do that's added if you know the personal details about a user or a resident.
Yeah.
You might need to know roughly where they live. You might need to know most of their postcode. You probably don't need to know their name. You might need to know a council tax number, but do you actually need to know their account number, or do you need to know something that represents their account number? You need to know that they're a unique person, but you don't need to know who the person is. And most of the time where people say, yeah, we need that, and then when you actually ask why, there isn't really a good reason. And you mentioned the ethics word, and as data platforms become more mature and people start using machine learning, ethics becomes really important because you're making decisions, or machines are making decisions for you about people. And if you know who those people are and you know protected characteristics, their ethnicity, etc., you can make some really skewed decisions based on data that shouldn't be involved in those decisions. And so if you can just remove everything that's personal, reduce everyone down to a number, which sounds really horrendous, but that is the principle, right? That is the principle. If everyone is just a number and they represent a data point without any mention of those protected characteristics, and people might say, well, a name's not a protected characteristic, but it can be, right? You can infer a lot from a person's name, or you might think you might be able to infer a lot from a person's name. Actually, it's a really dangerous thing to feed into a machine learning model. And the classic, sort of facial recognition problems, or training something on Reddit is a terrible idea, although it's not, because it works really well in some cases, but it can cause some really skewed results if you're not very careful. So, there's all kinds of problems with how you use this data. And I guess from a non-public sector point of view, if someone emails in and says, I want all of my records removed, if you can say, well, we're not storing any personal data. We have a record for you, but we don't know what record that is. I can't delete it because it's not personal. It's just a record. And apply that same principle. Use that as a principle and only put personal data in there if you absolutely need it. And I would almost go as far as to say, store the personal data in the system where the personal data belongs. You have a database of council tax records. Keep that personal. Copy it and anonymize it, or even better, pseudonymize it when you put it into the data platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's
protects you from all kinds of problems.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a good way to sort of draw things to a close, because there's very much a sort of just because you can doesn't mean you should kind of watchword here. And I think, not so much recently, but there was a time when people say, well, just collect all the data you can. You never know what you might be able to do with it in the future. And it's like, well, the world doesn't work like that. People are a bit smarter, and there's an ethical thread that runs through this, that, you have a responsibility as a public sector organizations to be transparent and fair, and to be, creating services based upon need, not upon sort of supposition and that sort of stuff. So it's a good one it's probably a good thing to round it off with that, and to for those public sector data folks to always bear that in mind. And I feel like we've kind of done a nice A to Z through that whole sort of data journey. As we said up top, there are caveats, there are nuances, there are organizational specific challenges that we can't cover in 30 odd minutes, but I think we've covered some good ground. So really enjoyed that journey. So Jim, all it remains to say is thank you very much for joining us for the episode.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So there we have it. Thanks again to Jim for joining me today for that conversation. loads of practical takeaways around how to get your own organization data ready and how to make the most of those insights that the data can drive. We'll be along soon with another conversation with a public sector change maker. But until then, that's all from us. See you again soon. Bye-bye.